Hello, I hope you can all hear me. Thank you for joining us at this afternoon's virtual matinee on this rainy afternoon, the best bit of which is none of us have to leave the house. I'm Finn Kennedy, Artistic Director of Tamasha, the company who were behind the plays you just heard. And what a pleasure it is to be able to share some new work with an audience after the year we've all had. We've done a few of these with the National Archives and others. The bit we haven't worked out is what the virtual version of applause looks like. So if anyone wants to have a go in the chat, maybe with some emojis, then please be my guest. Thank you to Jeff and Sarah at the archives for their generous introductions. Sarah mentioned about the power of audio drama to bring these archives to life, and she's absolutely right. This isn't the first time we've worked with the archives. We've done a previous audio drama project, and what I love about it is that it's not just those personal stories, it's the intimacy, especially with listening with these things in. It's almost like a hotline to the heart when it's at its best. I really love it. And the best bit is you can go anywhere and do anything with audio drama and going in and out of characters' heads, back and forth in time. So it's perfect for bringing to life historical material. And of course, it all costs the same because there's no expensive sets. I think it's perfectly suited, and it's been a real pleasure to work with the archives on this project and others. I'm going to introduce you now to some fine practitioners of the art form. I'm pleased to say we're joined by the writers of those two pieces, Hassan Abdulrazzak, whose piece came first, The Fireman, and Satinder Chohan, whose piece Steam Rises you've just listened to, and Iqbal Singh, who is also involved very intimately with this project, and is our man on the inside, burrowing through all that extraordinary material and curating it for our writers. Panelists, would you switch your cameras on and say hello? So, thank you for joining us. I will field some of the questions in the chat as they come in. Audience, feel free to post. I'll get through as many as I can. We've got about half an hour. But I'm going to kick off by asking each writer actually to talk a bit more about the genesis of their piece and what the process was like going through that material and how you kind of extract stories from it. Hassan, would you start us off?
Sure, thank you, Finn. So yes, this was, I was very lucky that this was my second project with Tamasha and the National Archives. And the process always starts the same. Iqbal finds for us amazing files in the archives. This time it was about sailors between the interwar periods. And we arrive at the archives and we sort of sit at these desks and we have the files come that carry these stories, and you sort of open them with anticipation, not knowing what's going to come, what you're going to unravel. My piece in particular, I had little snippets of Yemeni sailor stories, little, and with this archive, it's kind of like you're coming in the middle of a conversation. So there are correspondence with Home Office or with other official bodies, and you sort of you get a glimpse of the case, you get a glimpse of why they've contacted the officials, and then they disappear from the files. So your task as a writer is to try and piece that together and put it together and try and give it a framework. I also had a file that was about people petitioning the Board of Trade to try and stop the Arab sailors from getting employment. So these were inspiring sort of files, and my task was just to put them together.
Your piece actually gave us our title, Hassan. Once British, always British is a direct quote, isn't it, from one of those letters?
That's right. Yes, one of them.
Yes. Which we loved, and Iqbal pounced on and recommended. So good spot. Satinder, how was it for you going through these histories?
It was a really fascinating experience, and yeah, we were basically taken down into the bunker of the archives, and sort of Iqbal had curated these piles of files for us, and it was a case of working through each of those and just glimpsing the most amazing sort of aspects of these Lascar lives. And I was, so while Hassan was concentrating on the Yemenis Lascars, my focus was on the Asian Lascars, South Asian Lascars. And Iqbal had also given me a specific brief to find the voices, the missing voices of the women in these Lascar lives as well. So whether they be the women that these men had left behind, the mothers, the sisters, the wives, or the women, the white women that they encountered in their lives over here. So I sort of zoned in. I mean, it was such a hard pick trying to decide, you know, which file to focus on, which life to focus on. And I ended up taking a little bit of lots of the Lascar lives that I came across, but I specifically focused on a man called Hassan Khan. His other name was Calendar Khan. And there is the real life incident of the GBH that happened on his basically on his work shift. And I wanted to center the play around that because for me, just looking through those files, there were so many parallels with illegal immigrants in this day and age as well. And the whole sort of, you know, the issue of institutional racism that we were reading through in the files, you know, governments trying to clamp down on these incoming Lascars. And there were so many parallels. And so I wanted to use that incident as the sort of focal point of my piece. And in the actual files, it says that Calendar Khan was a man of excellent character. And we're never told why in the files, why this incident actually transpired. But one can imagine that he was at the end of his tether for whatever reason, lashed out, angrily. So it was about me sort of constructing what that possible story could be. And I just thought it was a perfect sort of invite to construct what it would have been like to have been Asian, male, working class, an immigrant in 1920s Britain. So I ended up just taking little bits from other files as well, but that was my main case study.
Brilliant, thank you. Iqbal, where does all this sit within the archives work, and what drives you to have done it more than once with us?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the main answer is that the archive is just one voice. And I think it's really, really important to hold that. So when you look at a file, you literally are listening to just the voice of one person, often an official, who's interviewing. Say in the case of the files that Satinder and Hassan were looking at, they're officials interviewing these people. So it is really what that interviewer and the interviewee say, but obviously it's the interviewer's sort of notes. And so I think really capturing those other voices and other sides to this story has been key. And I think drama does this brilliantly, and particularly in the hands of, you know, talented writers who are really committed to the material as well. And I think both writers bring that richly to this work in sense of their own real interest in these stories. And by doing that, I think they're making them our stories, which I think is what's really rich. And so the archive is literally going out and being, you know, it's on tour. It's for me real outreach.
Yeah, well, could you say a bit more about that? Because what's so great about audio drama is once it's pre-recorded, you kind of got it, haven't you? Unlike theatre, where if you miss it, you've missed it. Where else might these plays end up being used?
I mean, we are launching a lesson plan later this year at the Historical Association in May, which will accompany the plays. So the plays will sit alongside the lesson plan for teachers. The other idea is, you know, hopefully when things, you know, are not as tied up, as it were, with COVID, that the plays could actually also go elsewhere to be heard, you know, as listening events. And I think there are lots of other options with this format. And so I think, you know, we need to explore those further, but certainly there are students and others who are really interested in these approaches, and having writers like this sharing their work. And we're hoping to sort of have a little film made of Hassan and Satinder talking in more detail about some of that process. So that also will give, you know, hopefully, again, a rich package that really brings, again, you know, the archive to life.
Yeah, you can particularly imagine it working well in education and bringing it to life for young people a lot more than, you know, documents or documents alone anyway. I'm going to keep a chat. Mostly people are saying well done and hooray. So I thought I'd pass that on. There is a question for you, Hassan, about the mental health dimension in your play and how you arrived at that.
Yes, I mean it. So I had the challenge of I wanted to stay true to the voices I found in the file, and I was really caught by these. There were many, like as I said, little stories that I came across, but the ones that interested me were this father and son, because we had fragments from their letters. We had a fragment of the father's letter and also of the son sent to officials. So I wanted to stay true to their voice, but they were little fragments. So I wanted to find a way to piece together, to frame together this with the other file that I found where people were petitioning against these Arab sailors, and to tie it together. So it occurred to me that somebody who's in the present looking at the past would enable that to happen. And with using a condition like bipolar, where there is an element of the patient can experience kind of hallucinatory experiences, that allowed a kind of organic way of creating a kind of a device that allowed Sahar, the narrator, to look back into the past and to kind of really experience it viscerally. So she is not just removed or just reading files, but she's actually kind of interacting with her great grandfather and believing she is seeing him, and that made it kind of more immediate. And at the same time, to take this opportunity to highlight some of the issues that people with mental health face, that it can be something that's looked at as sort of being completely debilitating, but people do get on with their lives. They are able to be productive and so on. So I wanted to champion that because I think it's something that is often neglected as well. So I tie these two elements together to create the story.
Brilliant, thank you. And as a technique, of course, it could only work on audio, so it was perfectly suited. There's an apocryphal story among us radio writers, audio writers. I don't know if it's true or not. It's probably not, but I'm going to say it anyway. That a little boy was asked if he preferred TV or radio, and his answer was radio because the pictures are better. There was a nice comment about the visuals we created in the comments. Satinder, could you talk to us a bit more about this working with fragments in this way, and how comfortable, where's the line around making stuff up? Basically, you've only ever got these sort of glimpses, and is there a sort of, how do you ensure that the stuff that you do make up is still kind of accurate, as it were?
So I guess it's about, there was a lot of background research into that period as well, and it's a really sort of pivotal time because you've got the end of the First World War, and then you had some really quite significant race riots that happened all around the UK, and in some of the places that Hassan was looking at and I was looking at, race riots in Liverpool and Cardiff primarily. I think those were the biggest hotspots. But these clashes between soldiers and sailors of color, and basically white soldiers who were returning from war, and there's this, it's basically that these men are competing for jobs, housing, and women. So I think it was so much about just trying to capture the mood of the time as well. The fact that these Lascars are coming in and there is like growing anxiety about these men moving into these communities, taking the work, taking the housing, taking the women. And it's a real conflict. So it felt like while I was working with Hassan Khan's file, and taking sort of major incidents and very much his background, he came over from Kiamari Wharf, which was like a port town close to Karachi. I take sort of real life elements, but in the gaps, in those unspoken gaps, it was just trying to understand what might have been happening to a man, of his ilk at that particular time, historically and culturally. And that felt like, those felt like the gaps to me. What would it have been like for him in a boarding house? Like if he had met a lot of, and a lot of the Lascars did stay in boarding houses, and they met white women like Maggie. And Maggie herself, women like her were going through an incredibly emancipatory experience post-war, because they had been the ones who had filled in for the men in these wartime industries. So they were going through this incredible awakening as well. And so just to see a man of color like Buhar meeting Maggie, it felt like, you know, these two people basically were kind of symbolic of the emasculation of like white masculinity at the time. They were seen as a threat, and it was anxiety inducing for the returning soldiers. So it felt like those were the gaps for me, where it felt plausible, it felt realistic because it was based in historical fact, but it still had to be a story. It still had to be a story. So it wasn't that this is, you know, Hassan Khan's life, but this is how I would have imagined someone like him, his life to have been at that particular moment in time. And it was, you know, it's massive seismic shifts that were happening all over the place. So, yeah, I wanted something of his life.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
That just in terms of reflection, I think Satinder did an excellent job in really getting that voice of the woman or the women who were left behind, as it were. And you know, in her play, you get that sense of how much work the wife who's left behind has to do. And this really does capture, you know, something which is not just fictional, but is rooted in fact. And that, I think, is very important. And I think Hassan similarly, bringing out the real sort of tension that there is, that people who have served and felt that they were okay to serve when they were called upon to serve, are now being told, well, you can't now serve, or you need to prove that you have to serve, or you have the right to serve. I think it's these kinds of tensions and these shifts that are occurring, particularly in this interwar period, that have been brought out brilliantly by both writers.
Thank you. About voices anticipates the next question in the chat, actually, which is about what was the experience like of writing from a real voice from a past time, as opposed to wholly your own voice. Hassan, I'm going to ask you to take that one, because I think yours does contain more direct quotes from the archival material than Satinder's, but also you've had to find the voice not only of the historical characters, but the modern day ones as well. How was that?
Yes, I wanted to stay true to the files as I found them and the voices in the files. I think part of that was kind of informed by the fact that I just finished writing a verbatim play called The Special Relationship, which was about British people who were deported from the United States in the age of Trump. So I got fascinated by the whole process of taking real life quotes or material and shaping it into drama. And I wanted to do the same for the material that I found in the National Archives, to stay kind of true to them. And then to have a fictional device in the form of Sahar, who's this narrator who can go anywhere and do anything and be her own self, but kind of whenever we encounter the characters, to stay as true as possible to them. And I think that is a way of, that was sort of a way of honoring them, honoring the voices, helping the voices. I mean, I was very excited by the process that you can take these files, take these material that have just been sitting there for decades, you know, and these voices that have just been sort of silent there in these files, and to bring them to life suddenly, and to have actors embodying them, and to have the actual words said is something that I found immensely exciting to work with. And my task was just to kind of shape it into a drama and give it kind of a dramatic kind of device and momentum. But to have those real words come alive, spoken, it's kind of almost like a relic from the past kind of coming to life. So that was exciting.
I remember the first time I went to visit the archives to meet with Iqbal for the first time, my spidey sense went off, as I like to call it. As a writer, just all these sort of sense of all these voices and histories kind of buried all around you. It's a treasure trove, really. There's a balancing act, though, isn't there? Because quite often the language of the archives is quite formal, because it's a formal record, or people are writing letters to the Home Office and so on. And as you observed, Satinder, it's also overwhelmingly male. So there's a balance to find, but you don't want that in your dialogue, do you? Because it's going to be kind of, well, you know, tough to listen to and not very realistic. Did you have a process of kind of talking to Iqbal about vernacular speech as well as the formal language in the archives?
Did I?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, Iqbal and I spoke a lot about different aspects of, the sort of contextual backgrounds of the men and the files. And actually, because it was interesting because my guy was, he was from Karachi, which at the time was India. It was India, so Pakistan didn't exist. And it was also just trying to pinpoint exactly what his background was, because was he from Sindh? Was he from Gujarat? It was like because at that time, because you've got these ships coming in and out of the ports, you're starting to get this cross-cultural crossover of communities as well. There's a real community sort of cosmopolitan mix that is happening around the ports that is being mirrored across empire as well. So those were the sort of conversations that we were having. So in terms of vernacular, it was like, okay, so culturally, where is he from? What is his background? What language would he be speaking? What language would his wife be speaking? And the English, of course, he would pick up as a Lascar on all the ships that he's been working on. So broken English. So linguistically, it's such an interesting time as well. And yeah, Iqbal and I mean, and Hassan too, just, the most incredible conversations around so many issues pertaining to these men and women's lives.
Thank you. Iqbal, there's a couple come in, which I'm going to ask you to take. So Sue asks, who can use the archives? And then another question asks specifically about the references for your sources for the Yemeni story, Hassan, and someone in particular wants to find out more about Yemeni and Somali sailors in Cardiff, but doesn't know where to start. Iqbal, where should they start?
I mean, the archives are free, so that's the first thing to say. They are free to access. Unfortunately, with COVID, it's obviously restricted, and obviously it is still, in London, as it were, which, I mean, more work needs to be done on digitizing, obviously, as you know. And in terms of the files, I mean, one of the things that we're hoping to do as a result of this is to kind of collate some more detailed information about the files that we used. I mean, recently I wrote a blog that will give a few more clues as to some of the files that you need to look at. And certainly there is a host of really quite eminent historians who have done some really excellent work. And at the forefront of that, and somebody that we worked with closely at the National Archives in developing this project, is Rosina Vizram and her book Asians in Britain, that really allows you the first entry point. But certainly the work of Tony Lane, of Laura Tibili, and Balachandran. These are all, historians who have done some really, really interesting and important work in this field. And there are others out there as well. And so I'd certainly ask anyone who's initially interested to look at the secondary reading and try and find the files that really interest them and the stories, and then to make a visit, certainly to the National Archives, but also regional archives. I mean, Glamorgan Archives, which is in Wales, certainly does have records that relate to these stories. And that would be, for example, a place to look as well.
Thank you. So, I mean, practically, I have to expose my ignorance here, because I've never done it, to my shame. I get other writers to do it, but how do you book ahead? I mean, what do you do? Do you go online and sort of, can you browse them all and do your search and then send a message that they're kind of brought up, a bit like in the British Library, at an appointed time, or can you just sort of walk in?
No, you do need to book, particularly in this time that we're in.
Yeah, sure.
book what you want, and so that, yeah, I mean, similar to when you go to a big library or an archive, the documents are ready for you to then, so you're not faffing around. But a lot of those guides are online, so definitely people will be able to see them online to understand what's the best way to access.
Yeah, great, thank you. I was amazed to discover that the National Archives has all the government's declassified records going back to the Doomsday Book, if you can imagine how many that is. So I mean, the amount of stories left to mine there, I mean, we could spend the rest of our careers probably doing this, Satinder and Hassan, couldn't we, with all that brilliant material? But it's a joy to sort of engage with, and I would encourage people to go and check it out. For fun as much as for family histories and whatever, because there's so much inspiring material there. Iqbal, I think we've got time for one more question. If you can answer it, that'd be great. But there's no questions in the chat, and I've lost track of the time, but we're almost there. I just wanted perhaps to ask Iqbal to say a little more about the rest of your research, because I know that you're sort of working your way through the 20th century chronologically. The last thing we did with you was about the First World War. Now we're on the 1920s. What's next? Is it the Depression?
I mean, I think the interwar at the moment is our focus. I mean, we will be launching the 1921 census later on in 22, so 2022, and we're doing a 20s exhibition as part of that, so that will be really exciting for people to come and look at, and some of the records that we've used in the plays will be featured in that. And I'm particularly interested, as I say, in taking this research into the interwar period much further and deeper. I think it's part of this widening and deepening of understanding of history. And the interwar period in particular, in terms of the colonial story, is absolutely pivotal and often loses attention because of independence struggles and other big things that happen like wars. But there's a lot of shifts that are occurring in this interwar period, and both writers, I think, capture in different ways those shifts that are occurring. As in Hassan's play, you see this extraordinary shift going on in terms of issues about nationality and subjecthood and who can and cannot belong, and boundaries and where the lines are drawn. And with Satinder's play, you've got this really richness about these new people coming out of this war period. You know, she talked about the women, the men, their new lives, the connections they're making. And it's all of this richness in a very, very sort of flexible new period that I think is very exciting. And so we're really looking forward over the next few years to really work on that and make most of it.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, I hope we can work with you on it too, and perhaps make some more dramas. It's time to wrap up. Thank you, everyone. It's been a real pleasure. Audience, if you enjoyed these pieces, please do give us a tweet. We are at Tamasha Theatre. Forgive me, Iqbal, I'm not sure what the Archive's Twitter handle is, but if you know it off the top of your head, or if not, people can search. And if you know people who would like to listen to these who weren't here today, then they will be on, the Archives has a media player, doesn't it? Where they will end up soon, I hope. And we'll also find a way to put them on the Tamasha website, which is tamasha.org.uk. We have a SoundCloud account, which we'll link to once they're up, and a mailing list you can join and things like that. So it's time for a virtual goodbye. I hate this bit because it's like hanging up. But that's what we have to do. Thank you, Hassan, Satinder, Iqbal, for a wonderful afternoon, and I hope we can do it again sometime. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and happy history. Bye-bye.
Bye.